The next artist I'm going to talk to you about is another American painter. Her name is Susan McDowell, and her married name is Susan McDowell Eakins. Now, you probably know that name. This is a portrait of her painted by her husband, the very, very famous American realistic painter Thomas Eakins. Susan was a pupil of Eakins when he taught at the Pennsylvania Academy of Art in Philadelphia. Now, you're going to hear probably over and over again about the Pennsylvania Academy of Art. It was an art school that allowed women in. And a number of women who became professional artists first got their training at the Pennsylvania Academy of Art. Mary Cassatt, obviously Eakins, Susan McDowell, Cecilia Beau. So, and they would give awards, and they would exhibit. So it really was a place that someone could go, even if they were a woman, and get a professional start. So Eakins was her teacher. One of the things I've noticed is I found two portraits of Susan Eakins on the web, and they're both by Thomas Eakins, and she looks so, I mean, these are much older. This isn't when she first married him, obviously. It's much later in her life. But she looks so downtrodden. And here she looks so thin. I wondered if she was sick. It's kind of depressing, actually. Don't know anything about their marriage, except what I'm going to tell you right now. She married Thomas Eakins, very famous painter, and before then she was starting a career. She was exhibiting. As we'll hear, she won an award. And after she got married, she no longer exhibited. In 1916, Thomas died, and Susan resumed her painting. She did have, she did continue to paint and create, but she did not have any kind of one-person show, no solo exhibit, until long after her death, over 30 years later. So recognition often takes a long time, and we'll know there's a number of women artists who are married to very famous male artists. Later on you'll see, for example, Lee Krasner, and her husband, Jackson Pollock, was just the cause célèbre, and they seem to think that she was the lady who baked cookies or something. It was after his death that she was recognized as an artist, I guess you'd say in a meaningful way. I think people who knew them knew she was an artist. So this is another pattern. We've seen people like Lily Martin Spencer, whose husband is actually willing for her to be the breadwinner and supports her in this. And now we see the opposite, where Thomas Eakins' wife basically becomes the helpmate and support to her very famous husband. She goes back to painting after his death. So we're going to see some work both before she gets married and some work later in her life. This is before they're married, and this is a picture of her sisters. So it's just called Two Sisters. Shows her sister Mary and her sister Elizabeth McDowell. And this is interesting to me because I didn't know that Roanoke had an art museum. But this is actually, with about a 5-hour drive of Johnson City. I haven't seen the painting, I'm sorry. So I'm going to show you two different reproductions of it, and the color's a little bit different. So we'll just have to go to Roanoke and see which one the color is closer to. In 1879, Susan McDowell won a prize, the Mary Smith Prize for the best painting by a woman, by a matriculating woman, from the Pennsylvania Academy of Art in Philadelphia. I don't know whether this was the painting or not. My sources just gave the date, but this is from that date, and so it might have been this painting. And here we see it with a little bit different color, a little more blues in here. The portrait is a portrait of her sisters, very intimate, just doing everyday activities, kind of close up. One sister is reading and has stopped reading and is kind of looking over at what her sister is doing, who seems to be threading a needle. The brushwork is very, very lively. I found this on the web. It's from the John D. Rockefeller collection, so obviously I haven't seen this. But it's from 1880, and it's just an anonymous woman. We don't know the sitter's name, a woman seated with a kind of beautiful play of the color with the warm sort of ochre backgrounds and the very delicate blues and whites in the woman's garment. Kind of original how she's original how she has posed her sitters. We do know that Susan McDowell exhibited at the Philadelphia Society of Artists in 1879, again in 1880, but 1884 she got married and she gave up her painting. Evidently, though, she was still allowed to do photography, which perhaps at that time they didn't realize or didn't think of as much as an art. Or maybe it just took less time, so she could have had more time for domestic duties. I don't know. I didn't find out much about her photography, although there are some pictures on the web. Now, this is a portrait of her husband. The date, as you can see, they don't know exactly, but they say 1920 to 25. Since Eakins died in 1916, it is probably created from a photograph, and it's probably a photograph that Susan McDowell Eakins actually took. The pose, for example, is not something that you would have usually with a professional photographer, which would be much more staid. This is very intimate, very realistic, very personal kind of picture. So her husband has been painting. He's kind of looking around the edge of the easel, painting. So we're seeing American realism, very free brushwork, an informal, personal kind of composition. And the colors are close to being browns and grays, pretty monochromatic, which takes an amount of skill to create a picture that's not totally dull and boring when you're using basically grays and browns, which was also a color scheme that her husband, as you saw, also used quite a bit of. This is a bit later. The picture on the right is by Susan Eakins. The picture on the left is by Thomas Eakins. And there's about 30 years apart. And you can see that her husband certainly does influence her art even after he has been dead for some years. The picture by Thomas Eakins is of a portrait of Henry O. Tanner, who is probably the most famous black painter of the 19th century, and as you see, he lives into the 20th century. He is a rather wonderful painter, actually. And so, he obviously would have perhaps known Thomas. They're both painters. The pose is very similar to the pose that Susan Eakins uses later for her portrait of Luigi Moratti. And he is another artist whom they know. He's a Philadelphia artist. He's a friend of the family. And once again, you have that kind of intimate close-up view. Luigi seems to be even more introspective, almost like he's painted perhaps without, it looks like we've just seen him, like he doesn't even know we're there. His eyes are down, he's thinking. So, there's something very personal about the painting. We see, once again, the monochromatic colors, these browns, and just relieved by the white collar, the touch of red in the tie, cravat, and, a little bit of warmth. It looks like there's a little touch of red in his ears, too, sort of throughout the skin tones. The brushwork is extremely vigorous, and it looks like she's just, sat down and just spontaneously created this. However, she talks about it took her years to paint the painting. And she's very, very careful with her technique, even though it looks very free and very vigorous. I did find references to the fact that she also painted still lifes, and I did find this picture on a website. there was no date associated with it. Some of the other pictures that are still lifes that are listed, the Smithsonian Institution has a list of American artists and where they are or where they were, and so they seem to have repetition of some of them, listing as many as they know of their works and where they are and the dates if they are known. And it usually doesn't have pictures attached to it, so it just says still life or something like this. Several of the still lifes were from the 20s, 1924 to 25, so that I don't know if this one was from the same time or not. But it's a rather, interesting still life. Once again, you've got that monochromatic background, colors, and the subtlety of the colors, and then the white Japanese vase or the cream Japanese vase sort of stands out a bit. You've got a contrast of textures, different elements of Japanese vase, and the beads are both these circular shapes. There's a variations of the colors. You see this sort of deeper red in the beads with the kind of salmon-y reddish color in the vase. And so you have things going from the pastels to the very intense colors. So once again, sort of a rather wonderful still life, and shows her skill.